name's Jasmine, and I build and fly radio-controlled aircraft, and you may have seen my series while I built this airplane. Next, I wanted to do a series on how to set up a radio-controlled airplane. Not all airplanes are fresh builds. Some of them you buy used from friends or online, and it's a good idea to go through the entire aircraft and get it set up and ready for you to use, regardless of whether the other person was flying it or not. And this is a checklist that I like to go through with every aircraft, and I also do the same thing every spring to make sure the aircraft is ready for the coming flying season. So I'll be going through and setting up control surfaces, programming the radio, and double checking a couple things. There were a few things in the build that I didn't do that I had made mention of because I knew that I was going to cover it in this series. So next up, we'll start tearing into this thing and start getting the electronics set up. So let me get the camera repositioned. We'll start programming the radio, getting ready for the model so that we can bind it up and start programming the onboard electronics. Okay, so I've got the camera set up here with the radio, and I wanted to show you some of the things that I do before I bind it to the aircraft. There are a few features that I want to use, like I like to set up each wing half as its own wing. So to do that, we use the flaperon settings. Then you have to take out the initial flap mix, because then when you power on the aircraft, all your ailerons are going to go crazy, and you're not sure, exactly how that's going to be. So either disconnect your linkages, or you can follow these steps. So what we're going to do is first enter the menu. And while I'm doing this on a JR radio, a lot of the information you can translate to Futaba or High-Tech or whatever radio system you're using. I happen to use the JR radio, and so this is what we're going to do. First thing, I want to go in and give the model a name. So we're going to call it my PAU Ultimate. But there aren't quite enough characters, so we'll get this close. PAU Ulti. Yay! Now go in here and do the wing type, and you can see the wing is set to normal. This is where I want to change that to flaperon, and that allows me to have a left wing and a right wing. And later on I'll show you how I have that wired up. And then in the device select, I like to use the flight mode switch on the top, like I do with the helis. So I'll set that to the flap switch, and I like all my dual rates set up on the flight mode, and I also do my trim on the flight mode. When you have a low rate, high rate setup, a lot of times you'll get a little bit of a different reaction when you change. So by having it separate and you have this big deflection difference, you can set the trim accordingly. Now, and then we can, it is an airplane, just double check, and now we can go into here. So this is your normal window, and the first thing is go into the flap system, and you can see right here, as soon as you turn it on in normal flight mode, you're going to have your ailerons pointing up 100%. So I like to take that out, so that in my normal flight mode, when I first turn it on, it's got nothing but its normal setting. Now, this being an aerobatic model is going to be no flaps specified in here so that I can have the flight mode. But other models, say a P-51 Mustang or something like that, you might want to have it to where you have a mid low flap for your approach, and then your landing for just before touchdown, where you get maximum lift at minimal airspeed. Okay, so at this point we have the basic setup. You can see everything is factory default. And next we will go ahead and bind it to the radio so that we can start programming the airplane. So let me go ahead and move the camera over to that, and we'll start taking a look at the SmartFly. And then we get to go fly. Okay. Alright, welcome to the inside of the plane. As you can see here, I'm using the SmartFly EQ6. It has a turbo regulator that regulates your voltage and distributes the power so that each servo gets its own individual power and buffered signal. So if a servo were to lock up or have a malfunction, this will isolate it and help make sure that everything else functions correctly and you don't short anything out and end up losing the model because one little servo went bad. And I'm using the JR Spectrum receiver, and the first thing you need to do is bind it up. So we'll put the bind plug in the bind port, and be sure to read the manual on the SmartFly stuff. There are certain precautions that you need to take, and I'll be going over those a little bit later as I get into this. But one of the important things is that the leads that have 3 wires should not be plugged into anything that says bat or bind on it. It should be plugged into a channel. I don't know all the technical reasons for that, but the instruction manual says to do that. Otherwise, it could cause the receiver itself to intermittently go into a bind sequence. And if you're in the middle of hovering 3 feet off the deck and it decides to go into a bind sequence, you're going to land on the rudder in a bad way. So let's not do that. Now the procedure for binding is you want to put the bind plug in, power it up, and for me I have a pin flag, so I'm going to turn this on, and you're going to see the receiver starts blinking here. On the back of the radio there's a push button. So we're going to hold the button in as we turn it on, and now you're going to see it go through the sequence, and when all the lights become solid, you're now bound up. So everything's fine there. Now let me go ahead and pull out the instruction manual, and one of the first things that we need to do with the SmartFly is we need to calibrate it so that it knows where the neutral position of all the sticks is. And this will help you, I guess, more easily program all your control surfaces and match them up. You don't have to go through the centering of everything because it'll learn what the center of the individual radio is. If you've ever noticed where you bought a plane and it had a Futaba radio and you go to put your JR in there and all of a sudden all the servos aren't centered, that could be the translation in the receiver. The SmartFly has the ability to learn what that center is and make it standard with all the servos so that the servo knows exactly what the middle of its travel is. So let me get this powered off and get the settings, and we'll power it back on and flash it so that it's a default setting. Now after we bound it, don't forget to pull the bind plug out. Keep it handy because later we're going to set the fail-safe in the radio in case you're going up mile high trying to get some icing on the wings or whatever. You don't want it to just go wide open throttle away from you. You want to put it into a sane attitude so that you have a better chance of recovering the aircraft. So let me get those settings and we'll tune that in and reset it. Okay, there's a slight learning curve to using the SmartFly, but once you get used to it, it's fairly easy to get along with. The big thing to remember is that when the channel is set to 0, it's going to function as normal. So anytime you want to go into a programming menu, you want to make sure that this is set somewhere between 2 and 7 so that it's not going to go, it's going to think that it's ready to fly and you're really wanting to program it. Now the option menu is accessed on the function by going to the number 9. So let's turn that to number 9 and we'll pull this over to number 7. So now when we boot it up, we're going to hold both buttons down and turn it on. Now the unit should start blinking slowly on channel 7, letting us know that it's accepted the request and we're now in the programming menu. Now to reset everything on the board, we're going to turn the function to number 8. Turn this to number 8, and now you can see they're all blinking slowly. Now this one requires a double confirmation. So we'll hold both buttons down for 2 seconds. Now it blinks fast. And now we'll do that again. And now it blinks even faster. So at this point, it's reset to factory defaults. Now to calibrate the center point, we want to take the function and go back to number 7. At this point, it starts blinking slow. Again, this is to calibrate the center points. At this point, you want to turn on your radio, and that will give the center point. Don't forget to center your throttle as well, otherwise it's going to calibrate the center at a bottom stick position. Now at this point, we're going to do the same thing. You want to hold both buttons down, and it's going to go into a faster blink. And then again, and now it's going to start learning all of the channels, and you can see as it goes through each channel and learns the center point from the receiver. We've got a couple fast blinks and a couple slow blinks. Now a lot of this could be because of the channels that are plugged in. At each one, there are going to be channels that are on a switch. Well, the switch is going to be set to either, one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum, and it's not going to be in the middle. This is smart enough to realize that because it's not in the area where it recognizes near the middle, so it's not going to calibrate that, which is good because then it knows which channels are going to be expecting a control surface servo instead of a switch servo. So at this point, we can go ahead and turn this back to 0, which is going to get us back into I'm ready to fly mode. And there we have it. So next, let me start plugging in the servos, and then we'll start going through and learning how to set the center point and the end points for the servo for our travel.